Good morning, good morning. Welcome back to the board game breakfast. Sorry for the delay. We were having some slight audio issues this morning. My name is Sam, and I will be hosting today's board gaming breakfast. For those of you who haven't joined us before for a board gaming breakfast, it is a morning live cast that we like to do every weekday where we'll go live and we'll talk about a game of the day. It's the game that we have stuck in our head or that we want to bring to the breakfast table to talk about for one reason or another, generally around the mechanics that make the game enjoyable for us. We will then take that game of the day and spin our wheel of mechanics to add a new mechanic or brainstorm how we might add a new mechanic into the game of the day. And then we will wrap up breakfast with designing or brainstorming a new game design in a 5-minute time crunch using a randomly generated game prompt. So with that explanation out of the way, I would like to present the game of the day. So the game of today's breakfast is going to be Featherlight by WizKids. It is a hand management game where you have these different feather cards. So there's this whole deck, and depending on your player count, you'll discard a number of them. And I believe everyone starts with 5 cards in their hand. And the rules are fairly simple. On your turn, you will pick a card and play a card. And so if you look at the back of the box, you can see that there is 6 different piles that you can play a card into. This they call the nest, and this they call your hand. Thank you for the update, Michaela. Michaela's confirming that sound is now working, so that was our delay for today's breakfast. So jumping back into how it plays is that on your turn you'll pick one and play one, and once you'll split the rest of the cards into 2 decks, and then once one deck is run out, you will go into final scoring. So with that brief overview out of the way, I would like to jump into the 2 mechanics of why I have brought it to the table today for the game of the day. The first ties into that deck mechanic where it's a simple action, but you've split the deck into 2 piles, and so that puts the end of the game trigger within the control of the players. So if you're not ready for the game to end, you can draw from the larger deck. If you're trying to end the game sooner, you can draw from the smaller deck. And so that agency that's given to the players and that non-fixed ending, I think, makes the tension to the game really good. The second thing I'd like to highlight in this game is that each card has a different scoring criteria that it's looking for. So for this one, it's looking for exactly 1 blue feather. If you achieve that, you'll get 15 points, and you have each, so like they each have their own unique scoring condition, and they all have their colors assigned to them. And so it's a small multi-use ability on the cards, but you're balancing this brain game of deciding which cards you want to keep into your hand for scoring, but you're also trying to figure out what cards you're trying to play out into the nest to cover up scoring abilities for other cards that you've seen other players take, or trying to get more, like if we had that yellow card in our hand and we only want 1 blue, we want to cover up that blue card in the nest. So the fact that the cards can be used as just their colors or the scoring condition, I find to be a very fun puzzle for this light filler style game. I believe those are the 2 main mechanics that I would like to highlight in today's game of the day. So now that we've discussed what the game of the day is, we'll move into our first exercise of the meal. So let me pull up our wheel of mechanics and spin that, and we'll switch over to our second piece. So what we'll do here is based on what commodities, speculation. Alright, so commodity speculation is what we were trying to add into today's game of the day. So let me just filibuster while I write that down so it's viewable for everyone on screen. And how this will work is we will take our phone and set a 5-minute timer to brainstorm how we might add commodity speculation to Featherlight. So I'd like to preface this and say that this is meant to be a filler game, so any additional mechanic added to it will make the game a little heavier, which I don't know if they're a little more complex or take longer to play, which you probably don't want in a filler style game, but I've already started it. I've wasted 30 seconds, so let's just jump into it. So there are, I believe, 7, maybe 8 colors. So there's 8 different feather colors in the game, and commodity speculation, for those who don't know, is where you're making some sort of prediction on what the commodities are in the game. So my interpretation of this mechanic would be that you're trying to predict something about the commodities. So for this game, it would be the types of feathers. And so potentially everyone would get a blind player screen, which would have on the fronts of it the 8 different feathers. There's my little feathers. We'll make them look a little more like feathers instead of just random blobs, but we'll have, or maybe that would be, So you have your feather screen, so this would be the information that's here, and you have at the nest in front of you here with the 6 cards laid out in front of you. And pardon my sketching, we're in a time crunch, so the beautiful art at this point isn't a huge concern, but you're potentially speculating either what color has, like what feather color is the, let me restart. The 2 thoughts I have is you're either speculating which feather colors will be out in which spot to get bonus points at the end of the game, or you're trying to predict what color will be the most prominent in the circle at the end of the game. So the commodity speculation is potentially you have your 8 different feather reference icons here, and you're placing your little feather marker under which you believe is going to be the most prominent feather in the nest at the end of the game, or you're trying to assign numbers. You could have 6 number tokens, and the nest on your screen would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This could be the alternate player screen. Let's undo that really quick. Sort of highlighting which card place equates to the number, and you're lining the tokens up under which you believe, so the 1 might go there. You might also think that there's going to be a blue in that 2 spot. Say you think there's a purple in the 4 spot. Maybe we think that there. So you would predict what feathers you think will come out and be in the nest at the end. So we are close to the 5-minute mark, so I'm going to stop it there to wrap up, just because we are running a little behind today because of the audio issues. So I apologize for the abbreviated rushed breakfast. But to recap, the 2 commodity speculation mechanic ideas that we were able to quickly ideate to get into the game of the day Featherlight were that you would have this blind prediction screen that would either show option 1 or option 2 as the reference material on this screen portion of it. And at the beginning of the game, you're predicting either which feather color you think will be the most populated in the center of the nest, or you're trying to predict which color will end up in which location of the nest. And so what I believe this would add to the game is sort of this hidden deception of you trying to sneak out extra victory points at the end of the game by getting predictions correct. And it would add this little tension of trying not to be too obvious about what color you want where or what color you want the most of, because then there would be a double part to the game of you're worrying about kind of getting all the right matching in your hand, but you're also trying to get those extra victory points at the end of the game. And so how I would test this is I would make both player screens on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper where I could cut them the long way, and I would probably make both concepts to test because the game's fairly quick in length anyway, where on the box it says takes anywhere from it says it takes about 20 minutes. From my experience of playing 2 players, it takes probably around 10-15 minutes. So I'd probably test both screens at the same time, and then I would take probably dice, since for the bidding aspect of it, because you wouldn't have to make those 1 to 6 tokens because the d6 would give you the number that you think it's going to be on, and then I would probably be able to test both of them at the same time. And so the first thing I would do is the next time we look to play Featherlight, I would get consent from the group that I have a couple house-ruled mechanics that I'd like to play around with, and if they agreed to playing that way, I would explain both options of 1 or 2 and see what the group's interest is between the 2, and that would be the first one I'd start with. But from there, we would play a standard round of Featherlight and just do the blind bidding at the beginning. The last thing, talking through it, that I thought of that I would need to test would be to assign what those victory points you would get at the end of the game for bidding correctly would be. Gut instinct is that most cards are around 10 to 15 points, so I would probably weight both decisions around getting, between 5 to 10 extra victory points. So potentially where this one is more within your control, you would be able to, I would probably make it less valuable, whereas this one is sort of a lot more chaotic. I'd probably start with 5 as a simple number to go from there. But that's how I would quickly take this idea to test in real life to understand its how it changes and plays the game, to see if this mechanic is even worth considering for a game like this. So that concludes our second phase of today's breakfast of adding a random insert into the game of today. So I hope you enjoyed that. And now we will jump into the final activity of today's breakfast. So we'll go over to letsmakeagame.net, and they have this fun idea generator where it will give you a genre, a rule, a setting, and a theme for you to design a game around. And so what we're going to do is click this generate button here, and we ended up with the genre being multiplayer, the rule being the entire game on the screen, the setting being dark fantasy, and the theme being fantasy power. So that's a very broad game prompt, but we're going to go with it. So let us reset our timer. While I do this, I'll check in with chat to see if they have any questions or comments that came up. Michaela was commenting on the game of the day Featherlight and comparing it to Arboretum, which is another card-based game about trees. I don't believe it is on our shelf. It is in our tuck box of games we like to travel with, but it is. She called it a game that has surprising depth and decision making and which cards to keep or which ones to add to the deck. I totally agree with that commentary. I think both of them have that fun feel of they're cute, lighthearted, easy to play, but you're going throughout the game and there's such tightness between which cards you want to discard because you don't want to give other players access to them. And then she was asking a question about the design concept we were going with, but then it appears that I answered your question, so I'm glad that that worked out, Michaela. All right, so without further ado, we will start today's brainstorm with the start of the timer. All right, so we got multiplayer, entire game on screen, dark fantasy, and power fantasy. So the rule, the entire game on the screen is making me think that this should be no hidden information type game. So potentially we within the construct of today's game of the day, I'm going to give myself a additional criteria that this can only be played with a deck of cards, and let's see how we come up with that. So the multiplayer is fairly standard, where it has to at least have 2+ players, and entire game on screen, so that at no point there can't be any hidden information. And I keep repeating myself so I can give my brain time to think of what we're going to do. Hidden info. Give it a big nope. So dark fantasy and power fantasy. But so potentially everyone is dealt a starting fantasy character, and that fantasy character probably has a scoring ability attached to it. So down here would be the scoring ability, and um, potentially you have how long do we want? So we probably want this to be a 20-minute game as well, because we want to stick within the Featherlight constructs. So maybe you have different abilities or powers that you have on each card. So you have a scoring condition and 4 abilities, or like ways that you can select cards, and it would be an open-faced draft. So over here you'd have the market, and you'd have similar to a cat lady, dog lover style of card market, if anyone's played either of those. All of the cards you'd have the ability to pick from are open information and face up. So we'll call that the front, and then we have the deck that has the back. And so each turn, a player would choose one of their scoring or one of their abilities to select a card. And so maybe the criteria is must be from the left, must be from the top, something like that. And they would then choose which power to block, and they place it covering one of the abilities. So I'd have to figure out how to make, maybe it's a standard, like you're first picking one like that, or you have all of the options, but as they get covered, you don't get to use them anymore. And maybe the cards themselves have a new picking ability up here. So I'm going to recap and synthesize where this direction is going while we still have the time. But right now we're at everyone has a starting player character that on the bottom of the card has an endgame scoring condition and 5 actions for how they can pick a card. Then in the market, it's an open face market where there's all of these fantasy or power fantasy type cards that give you special abilities that would allow you to interact with the market differently, and maybe we'll play with the same scoring ability being the nest feature, that's going to score based on what condition is on the bottom or out in the market, and you will play over the course of 4 rounds, selecting 4 cards to add abilities to, and maybe so it's the same thing. So each card in the market could have a scoring condition, and on top of it would have an ability. So you'd have the art here, and then you'd have an ability, and then you'd have a scoring condition down there. And you would play each round by selecting 4 cards in order of one person would select a card, then the next player would select a card, and so on until everyone has 4 cards. And then you would tally up the 5 scoring points, and to make it feel like a game, maybe you'd play 3 rounds of this, and after that you would add up total scores, and that would that the winner would be determined after those 3 rounds. So that is our multiplayer entire game on-screen dark fantasy power fantasy game. So with that, we have concluded today's board game breakfast. I know it was a little short today. Luckily, we had a lighter game to go through. So to recap today's breakfast, we talked about our game of the day being Featherlight. We then went into an exercise of adding commodity speculation to the game Featherlight, and we came up with 2 possible ways of how to add that. And then we finished off with coming up with a multiplayer game where there is no hidden information based around dark fantasy and power fantasy that we kept within the idea realm as something of a Featherlight where it was cards only, and you would have an open market face that people would be collecting cards from each round. And the cards have slight multi-uses where they have a scoring ability to them, but an action assigned to them as well. And so how I would test this, we'll call it MedP for multiplayer, entire, dark, and power. So how we would test MedP is I would do another fixed design blitz where I would generate the structure of the card, so I'd probably have the action on top, scoring on the bottom, and I would come up with 20 different actions and maybe 20 different scoring conditions or like frameworks, and mix and match and come up with. So let's do some quick math. We said 4 players, but maybe Featherlight goes to 4 players, so we'll stay at 4 players. And so each round you're getting 16 cards that are going to be within the player's hands themselves, or hands, played onto their characters, and you would have 9 cards in marks, so 25. So let's just say 100. So I'd come up with a 100 card deck, or close to it. Or no, you'd only need 75 because it's only 3 rounds. The arbitrary number we picked. So I would come up with at least 50 to play 2 rounds of it to get the feel of how 2 rounds feel, to get feedback on how this core gameplay works, and we would go from there. So thank you everyone for either coming to the breakfast and watching it live, or for watching this video when it gets uploaded to YouTube. If you have any thoughts on the 3 things we talked about of Featherlight, adding commodity speculation to Featherlight, or this MedP game that we came up with, if you have questions, comments, or anything you want to talk about, please let me know in the comments below. Have a good day.